Welcome everyone to the next PhRMA Foundation webinar. This one, Mastering the Art of Networking. I'm Amy Miller, President of the PhRMA Foundation, and today I will explain to you how networking has helped me throughout my career and give you some tips and pointers on how to do it yourself. This webinar went viral, and so we may have some people who haven't heard of the PhRMA Foundation. So I'm going to do a brief introduction to our organization. We invest in biomedical researchers who underpin the future of healthcare. We fund primarily drug discovery, drug delivery, translational medicine, and value assessment health outcomes research. I should note that our portal is currently open and accepting applications for value assessment and health outcomes research, and that portal will be open until about the 15th of November, or that 15th of November. So if you work in that space, take a look at the types of programs we're interested in and start your application now. We fund pre-docs, postdocs, and early career researchers in those 4 buckets. And I should say, for the pre-docs and the postdocs, if you apply for 12, 18, or 24 months, it has no bearing on your application. We look at every single application in terms of its program and timeline and what you're aiming to accomplish. And it takes you 12 months, great. If it takes you 24, that's okay too. So don't worry about that when applying for our funding. This is an example of some of our free resources. And so I just told you that we have an open portal right now for value assessment, health outcomes research, and we have 2 webinars on our website addressing just that. We also have other free resources. So crafting clear and compelling research aims and how to write a letter of intent are examples of our webinars. You can find them on our website. You can also find them on our YouTube channel. Every time we do a webinar, Emily Ortman, our head of communications, takes that content and repackages it. So here you'll see Peter Newman from the value assessment space, how to write a winning grant application. So if you're interested, you should take a look at what he's proposing. Also, writing letters of interest in grants, do's and don'ts, that works for every grant, no matter where you're submitting it. So informational interviews. What is an informational interview? Well, it's the opportunity to find out about career paths, make connections, and if you're very lucky, get a job offer. Let me explain. I was a AAAS fellow and I worked in the Senate, and I was looking for a new job, and so having informational interviews all over the city, and walked into one interview. It went really well. I left and was waiting for the NIH bus when the person I was speaking with came back out to me and said, "Hey, would you like this job?" And I was very surprised by that and said, "Please send me more information. Let me think about it." And I did end up taking that job. That's rare, but I did want to explain to you that throughout my career, every single job I've gotten has had an aspect of networking as part of that. So this is an important skill that you should add to your repertoire of skills. First rule of informational interviewing is be prepared. So how to prepare? Update your CV and LinkedIn. For each role, you need to talk about these features. I would like to add, though, if you're an academic and you're publishing, please, at the bottom of your CV or your NIH bio sketch, please add your official bibliography, because my name's Amy Miller, and if you go on Google Scholar, good luck trying to figure out what I've published, because there are many Amy Millers and they're all in very different fields. And so if you just do us a favor and put your bibliography down at the end of your CV, it will be very well received by everyone who looks at it. And the first thing someone's going to look at when they're agreeing to meet with you probably is your LinkedIn profile. Now think about, what do you want to know from this interview? And what you want to know is going to be different based on who you're talking to. So if you're talking to someone who's one career step ahead of you, that's a very different conversation than if you're speaking to an established researcher. So think about the person you're going to speak with and think about what you want to know from them. Do you want to know how they moved from a postdoc to a faculty position? Do you want to know about how that job search looks? Do you want to transition into industry and ask about how to do that? What the person's experiences were doing that? Lessons learned, pitfalls to watch out for? Or do you want to become the president of the PhRMA Foundation? Well, that's a very different group of questions. So think about who you're meeting with and think about what you want to get from that meeting and write the questions down. You also have to think about what's not going to work for you. So for example, if you're an academe and you do have the two body issue, you feel free to talk to someone about that. Also, if you have preferences for geographic, if you have geographic preferences, be sure to mention that. I went to grad school in New England, and I just don't ever want to live in New England again. And so if I were informational interviewing for another position, I would be sure to make sure it was not in New England. No offense to New England, it's beautiful, especially in the fall. And making the ask, just do it. I want to take a moment to recognize those of you who are introverts. This isn't as easy for you as it is for me. And so let me just give you some ideas on how you can move into informational interviewing. Let's say you're at a conference. You're going to a 3-day conference. Set a goal for yourself to introduce yourself to other people. I like to set a goal of 6 people when I'm going to a day-long conference or when I'm going to some sort of networking event. But you may want to set your goal as 6 people over the course of a 3-day conference. That's fine. But set your goal. And the way you can do it is simply go up to someone who you know. Say, I've admired your work for a long time. I would love to have 20 minutes of your time to discuss your career path with you. That's absolutely fine. If you're sitting next to someone and you strike up a conversation, just ask them right then, can we exchange information? Can we exchange contact information? Can we have 20 minutes? That's fine to do as well. If you hear a speaker speak, they might be very busy answering questions, but it's easy to say, I'd love to follow up with you. And just give yourself a goal. There are a number of questions that you can prepare to ask. And if you don't have time to prepare, then you can use these questions. But think about if you're asking me for an informational interview. What can we talk about? Well, how did you get from grad school to your postdoc? How did you find and land your postdoc? Well, the answer is networking. The guy I did my postdoc with knew pretty much everyone on my committee. And so I interviewed, got the job, the rest is history. Well, Amy, you did a postdoc and then you went on to a AAAS fellowship. How did you do that? Well, that was networking as well. I interviewed 12 AAAS fellows on networking interviews before I even applied for it. Why was that important? Well, I was able to craft the kind of application package that those people crafted in order to land the position. And so I applied for 3 different AAAS fellowship programs and I got 2 offers. So that worked. Amy, how did you move from working in the United States Senate into nonprofits? Again, networking. I left the Hill and was unable to find a Hill job due to votes. And a friend told me about this nonprofit job and said, you'd be great at it. You need to do it. And I did get the position. And what if you are mid-career and you want to talk about moving to the next phase? That's a different conversation. What if you're in academe, all you know are academics, but you really want to work in industry? Amy, what do you know about the transition to industry? Well, I can't help you very much because I haven't done it, but what I can show you is that we have a series of webinars on that transition. And then you can figure out if there's somebody else you know who's maybe interested in and kind of showing you the way. And as I'll show you later, we have a webinar coming up on that exact topic. So come up with a list of questions. And if you're stumped on sort of questions for a specific individual, look at their LinkedIn profile. And if they're an advanced person in their field, it's possible they'll even have little videos of themselves on YouTube. Or we went through COVID, and so there is a lot of video content freely available from conferences when they were all remote. And so you can get a little bit of a feel for that person. And I strongly recommend you do that. It's very helpful when you're speaking with somebody, especially if they're a stranger. All right. Craft an elevator pitch. You have 60 seconds to make a first impression. Hi, I'm Amy Miller. I'm president of the PhRMA Foundation, where we fund early career researchers in biomedical innovation. I want to be president of the United States. So thank you, President Obama, for agreeing to meet with me. I look forward to learning more about how you made the transition. Now, I don't want to be the president of the United States, but you get to the sense of what I'm doing. I recognize you for the awesomeness that you are. Here's what I'd like to talk with you about. Let's go. So on the day, here are a few tips. And we're going to have to talk about two different on the days. We're going to talk about virtual and in person. So let's go back to that conference place, because this is the easiest place to practice these skills. So you're at a conference, you're sitting next to someone, strike up a conversation and say, hey, are you going to the cocktail hour that is also a poster session? Yes. Can we catch up there for 20 minutes? Absolutely. Where are we going to meet? Tell them exactly where. Get their phone number. Ask them if you can text them a reminder. The other is if you are meeting at a conference during some downtime, ask them where you want to meet. Be very specific about location. So which hotel Starbucks? Where will you be? If you've been to that hotel Starbucks, is it a very large one? Is it a small one? Are you going to sit at the end of the space, or are you going to sit in the lobby? Be very specific. Maybe in a conference you can send an invitation to their calendar. Maybe that's not necessary, but think about doing that. It is perfectly fine to print out your questions, perfectly fine to do that and read them and take notes. That's not a problem. Keep it professional. So the ideal networking interviews are just about 20 minutes. And so you want to keep them focused and on target, and you want to connect with that person on some sort of professional level. So do try to keep it at that level, and then don't overstay. So once you're done with your 20-minute meeting at Starbucks, say thank you for your time and go. If you happen to arrive at the same time, offer to pay. If you're ever meeting with me, I absolutely won't allow you to pay. Don't push me, but sometimes I'm in a rush, and so please do offer to pay in case I don't have time to pick up, let's say, a breakfast check. But oftentimes when you're meeting with someone more advanced than you in their career trajectory, they will offer to pay. But since you're asking for time, it is the polite and right thing to do to offer to pay that first time. So I just wanted to let you know. And if, for example, you are for breakfast and it is not a 20-minute meeting, try not to linger. Try to take yourself out of the meeting so that the other person feels free to go and nobody feels awkward or feels rude. Now, it's different if you're doing this via Zoom or Teams. Do arrive early, even if it's just a few minutes. Recently, I've been doing some briefing meetings with people I don't know, and I get on my computer, I turn on the photo booth, which is the application where you can take a picture or video of yourself. I take a picture of myself, I check out the background and see if everything looks okay. That way I'm not tempted to look at myself during the meeting. But you should do that too. After you make sure you're lit well, after you make sure there's nothing distracting in your background, start the meeting a few minutes early. So this group of people I'm meeting with right now, they show up 2 or 3 minutes early, which surprises me, but I think it delights them too, that I'm ready to go. So also, if you're doing this didactically over Zoom or over Zoom or Teams, all the other rules apply, including the don't overstay. If you're having a great conversation and you hit that 20-minute time mark, simply ask, Do you have a hard stop or do you have a few more minutes? And the person will usually reply with how much time they have. What do you do at the end of the meeting? Thank them again. Ask for an introduction to another person. So I mentioned talking to 12 AAAS fellows before I applied. That was a chain of people, one after another. And everyone introduced me to just one, but it got me what I needed to land the position. I also would suggest you take notes, especially after you get done meeting with the people you know tangentially or you're one separated from. Take notes. I met Amy Miller at the AAAS conference. We talked about the fellowship. She offered to introduce me to another fellow and send me a link to some information on how to apply. Also, after the interview, send a follow-up email. In the follow-up email, thank them, ask them to introduce them to someone if they haven't made that connection yet. Amy, you offered to introduce me to Emily Ortman. Please do. And you can also summarize something you connected over. Let's say you're both interested in the fact that the Aurora Borealis got super south this year in ways it hasn't before. It has nothing to do with either one of your careers, but it's also a way to keep you a fresh memory in their mind. Also, play the long game. And so think about this as relationship building. So after you send your thank you note with your CV attached in the summary of the meeting, connect with them over LinkedIn. Stay in touch periodically. When you see some more interesting Sun news, send it their way. And again, keep a document with all your connections. So Emily adds a lot of humor to my slides. Transitioning, and so sorry for the abrupt transition, but we are doing another webinar on October 29th. The registration will come out after this, and it's transitioning from academe to industry. I have had an informational interview with all three of these people, and their stories are fantastic, and I think you'll benefit from listening to them. We can't do any of this work without our supporters, so thank you very much for these companies for supporting the PhRMA Foundation. And we are easy to find. I didn't touch on it, but it is okay to cold email and ask people for an informational interview. It takes bravery. You have to have a hook, but here we all are. And with that, we'll turn to questions.
Great job, Amy. So to kick it off, everybody put your questions in the chat, but a question I'd like to start with is, are there any topics that you think people should avoid bringing up in this sort of informational interview?
I think you should try to avoid personal topics. It's easy to connect over weather, but if you start talking about personal topics, you're going to lose time. It's not wrong to talk about personal topics. It's just distracting and it's not a great use of time, in my opinion.
Great. And what about like salary related topics? If you're unsure what the salary is like in a certain company or a certain field?
It's fine to ask about salary ranges. Of course, it's rude to ask somebody else's salary. But a few tips. A lot of people who work at nonprofit have their salaries are public. There are certain areas of health and human services where their salaries are public. You can look them up. There's also ways to find ranges, but it's also okay to ask. And just for those of you who are considering a transition to industry, you really don't have to ask about the salary because it's for sure time and a half or 2 times whatever you're making right now.
Awesome. And when you're deciding like who to ask for an interview, how do you pick? How do you pick the people you're going to ask for an informational interview? How do you find them?
There's a variety of ways. At conferences, sometimes you connect with someone who's in a lab you're interested in, or who's at a school or department you're interested in, and you just want to connect with somebody else within their department. It's totally fine to ask them for an informational interview. Or if you know someone who's made a transition you want to do. So, for example, from a postdoc to an industry job, or from a postdoc to an academic tenured position, it's totally fine to ask that person as well. Or if you're thinking about the role of AI and you're a medicinal chemist, go find yourself someone with that expertise. Explain how important AI may be in your future as a medicinal chemist. and just strike up a conversation. What do you think the role is?
Great. We have questions coming in the chat now. So this person asks, how can you ask someone to send you a referral link to a specific job you saw, or ask them to connect you with someone who may be able to get you a referral? How do you broach that topic with someone?
There's always I think there's usually position descriptions. And so if somebody tweets out, UC Davis is hiring a postdoc looking at the Aurora Borealis, it's fine to tweet back at that person, do you have a position description? Or try to find their email address. When you're looking at certain sorts of leadership positions, and there might be a recruiter, they also have position descriptions. When you're looking at industry jobs, there should be full position for that as well. And it's completely okay to ask for a position description.
Great. Another question is, can you provide some more tips about approaching people at a conference?
So everybody goes physically to conferences to meet and discuss. That's the point. And so it is perfectly fine for, if you see me across the room, Amy, I saw your webinar. I'd love to learn more about blah. And give me your contact information and let's talk. It is completely fine if you see that famous professor and they're somehow just sitting quietly drinking coffee. It is completely fine to say, I've long admired your work. I'd love to talk with you about the Aurora Borealis. That's completely fine as well. Don't be shy, because if you don't ask, the answer is no. If you ask, 90% of the time, the answer will be yes.
So kind of building off that, somebody is asking, do you only approach people with positions slightly higher than you? Or, are there pitfalls of approaching people with much higher positions than you are?
I've done it. Yes, I don't see there's a pitfall at all, because people in academia especially like the mentoring. People in industry who went through the academic route only to transition miss the mentoring aspect. So I don't think there's any downside to asking.
Another person asks, what's the best way to start networking with someone who you've never met in person? Are there specific strategies that you would recommend for building meaningful connections online, especially when starting out?
You can follow them on social media, like and respond to what they post on social media. Also, if they're in academia, you read a paper, you can ask them, hey, do you have 20 minutes to talk about what you just published? That's also completely fine. If you see this webinar and you're curious about the AAAS fellowships, for example, email me, ask about it. I'll send you information. I just think don't be shy. And if you are kind of a shy person, just do it. Get over it. Take a deep breath and just do it. It's not bad. It's a good thing.
Another person asks, and this might be more relevant to a job interview, but what to say if an interview asks if you have other offers?
That's a good question, which is I've been asked. I usually err on the side of honesty. I live and work in DC. It's a tiny, tiny city. Everybody knows each other. So I don't see any point in being deceptive. So to get this job, I did have another offer. I explained to both that I had an offer and would like to see the written contract in both, and I picked this one. It's completely fine to do that.
Great. And do you think it's better to ask for an in-person meeting or a Zoom meeting when you're asking somebody for an informational interview?
I'm a very in-person person, so I strongly urge you to try for in-person, but you really need to master both, because you're not going to wait a year to meet the person who lives across the country or across the world.
Another person asked, how do you approach people to ask for a funding opportunity or fundraising, or people in industry that have funding that you can compete for?
So that's a great question. And in fundraising, which I have been doing for, I think, 17 years at this point, it's a relationship building thing. You have to understand the funding opportunity. So Amy and Emily don't give away PhRMA Foundation money. We have a selection committee and a process. You have to follow that. I'm happy to tell you some things about what the foundation tends to fund, and plus it's all publicly available. With industry, I think you need to figure out what they funded in the past and think about a way to connect yourself to that. But That's definitely something you need to take the long view on. It's very hard to just say, hey, give me money.
Another person asked, what do you do if the person doesn't respond to an invite or a message on LinkedIn? Is there anything you should do after that?
It's the art of pestering, and I think it's okay to give it 3 tries, and you shouldn't pester like the next day. You should pester more or less a week later, then 2 weeks later, and then 3 weeks. Maybe you can send them an article in the Aurora Borealis and say, thought you might like to look at that. And then the person, if you're fortunate, will say, I'm so sorry I let that ball drop. Let's connect.
Someone asked, what information should be avoided in a short resume when you're introducing yourself?
I haven't seen anything in a resume that really bothers me. I would suggest you don't put your home address on it. I don't know why people still do that. I think it's a little weird. I don't want to know where you live. And then with hobbies, you're taking a risk that somebody for some reason is very anti your hobby. So let's just take golf, and I apologize to all you golfers out there. But there's a lot of really beautiful golf courses I'd like to walk on or hike on or stroll around. And I can't because I don't know how to golf, and I'm not paying a greens fee. And so you've got to think about your activities, and do you want to be judged for them?
That's funny. All right, no golf for Amy. So another question, maybe kind of along similar lines, is: are there any turnoffs, like from your perspective as the person on the other side, the expert being asked for an interview? Are there any turnoffs that you're like, oh, don't do this thing?
Um, when I answer a question, asking me over and over again after I've already given you an answer is one, and then not letting the meeting end when it's supposed to, that's another. Time is very valuable.
We have another person who says, is there an ideal elevator pitch that you would recommend?
Just a short one.
Yeah. I think unless anybody has any other questions, I think we've answered all the ones in the chat. So last chance, any other questions, drop them in the chat right now.
And if you want to look up scientific elevator pitches, there's a competition for scientific elevator pitches. And so you can go look at little YouTube videos all day long and hone yours.
All right, I think that's it. No more questions, and we're right on the hour or half hour.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming, and I hope you come to our next one, which is on October 29th.